Yeah, so maybe in the chat you could complete that sentence yourself. Post-prison homecoming is complex because. But when we did that exercise in the first meeting of the core group, the answers were already interesting and instructive. So I've listed a couple of things that they said. First, the question was asked, what is home that people are returning to, and where is it? Secondly, there were a set of responses that clustered around ideas about the internal change or conflict within the person, within the homecomer, and their expectations of homecoming. There were a set of responses which engaged with questions of stigmatization that people returning from prison experience or fear. There were a set of relational issues that people expressed in connection with families, friendships, wider society. There were a set of responses that spoke to the importance of external change in society to make homecoming possible. There were a set of responses that spoke to the complete failure of social institutions, including in the criminal justice system, to adequately support homecoming. There were a set of responses that spoke to unmet needs, basic needs, material needs, as people return from prison. And lastly, there were responses which pointed to the problem in finding a place of safety from which to begin the process of rebuilding a life after punishment. We've explored and elaborated on all of those things since in briefing papers, in academic articles, and in other forms of output. And there's lots of material on the website, www.distantvoices.org.uk. Again, we can stick that in the chat. So you can find stuff there, creative stuff, pieces of writing, academic and non-academic writing. And we've learned a lot through that process about the void, but I'm not going to say any more about it now because I want to move on to the next part in the conversation. We always have fitting sirens at Vox Liminis HQ outside. So firstly, we're going to invite Kate to reflect on the opening gig, and we've asked her to think about what it expressed to her about the void that punishment creates and how people respond. So it's over to you, Kate, for the next bit.
Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. I was quite usually creating interference, apparently, so I had to mute myself briefly. Sorry. So during the introduction and the discussion of the songs, Fergus identified a number of themes. It seems a little unnecessary to repeat those, but it struck me that there was one overarching theme that encompassed all of them in a sense. So that's what I'd like to talk about for a few moments. I waited until I had a suitable kind of reflective space to listen to the gig with, and I found it really quite touching, as I expected, really. But I think particularly we can all appreciate the poignancy of loss, particularly in the wake of COVID, and so of course never got to say goodbye has particular resonance, or we didn't get to say goodbye as we would have wanted. We're not being able to see your loved ones, to talk, to hold, to touch is something, again, we can all certainly empathise with post-COVID. And there were a number of references in the songs, having my girl on my brain, or 2 hours is never enough. This is consistently identified, of course, as one of the most deeply cutting pains and deprivations of punishment, the ache of being kept apart from those you love and those who love you, and being deprived of the recognition we find in the eyes of those who care for us. A number of the songs echo with that loneliness. They're heavy with that yearning for the smell of home. And it's a fitting time to reflect on what that means for those inside, particularly. And there are others concerned with the relationship with oneself too, of course, how those cold prison spaces are navigated and survived, as in autopilot, or how the challenges of coping are met, as in how close is the thunder. And there's camaraderie and comfort too in those you meet inside, displayed in the in-jokes in Queen's Hotel, or the warmth and hope in bars and multicoloured chairs. But what also resonates clearly throughout the course of the gig is the desire to rewrite one's story, and the way those collaborative relationships struck in the song's writing projects carve out that space, which enables participants to do that as they wish, grants them agency to tell their own story. It's apparent not only in the way the musicians talk about how deeply they've been affected by their involvement, but also in the songs themselves, a determination to batter through and bridge that distance between where they are and where they long to be, as well as who they long to be with, such as in Rewind, or that longing for an open door. And it's in that content of the songs and the feeling evoked that their potential to act, as you call it, relational problem-solving devices becomes apparent. And then, of course, there's the relationship created between those songwriters, their songs, and us who listen. There's a powerful capacity to bridge that distance between those behind and us beyond the walls, between where these people are and where they want to get to. And in the making of them, the playing of them, the listening to them, is the corresponding capacity for repairing some of the harms of exclusion. These distant voices become closer, and in their hearing provide a means of resisting that disintegration of relationships that involvement at the sharp end of the criminal justice system can so frequently result in. Their music provides a means then of bridging the void.
Thank you so much, Kate, for that incredibly thoughtful and generous response to the gig. That I have some questions for you, just really wanting to kind of bring in your own research on these things, but also I have a little anecdote for you because I know you're very interested in prison soundscapes. So in Bars and Multicolored Chairs, when it was first being recorded in the prison, Louis Abbott, who's the creative lead for the project, accidentally picked up on the recording the sound of one of the prison officers yelling at one of our other participants. And then he took this little slice of hierarchy and he played around with it in the sound, and then he kind of imported it into Bars and Multicolored Chairs. He kind of smuggled it in as like a little disguised sonic protest. So I thought you'd really like to hear that. So generally, do you have any reflections on the place of music, especially live music, within prison soundscapes from your own work?
Oh yeah, like, I mean, my starting point was music, but then it was really talking about music that got me interested in sound in the broader sense. So if I get those snippets, if I've got my recorder on, they do provide a really useful way of explaining what that environment's like. But so often the music is heavy industrial techno. But while I was visiting HMP Leicester, I was fortunate enough to attend their arts festival, Talent Unlocked, which is the first apparently in the UK. It was designed, well, the brainchild of Ralph Lukowski, who is now #1 at Hewell, with Simon Bland, who is still there doing music. I think he has fashioned a makeshift music studio out of a disused staff gym shower. And #1 at the time was Phil Novis, and they would do pop-up music in the place, and the transformative power of sharing that and having everybody join in, staff and prisoners alike, the community, was considerably more warmly received, even by staff who are a bit worried about security implications. And one event in particular was a band that was put together by officers and prisoners. And something really powerful happened in the collaborative making of music together, of skills. And that was really quite a privilege to listen to.
Thanks, Kate. I think I'm already realizing that we're going to run out of time because we've got far too much to talk about. So I'm going to skip us forward a little bit and get Phil to say a little bit about how she came to think about songs and problem solving through engaging with all the amazing material that the project generated. So.
Okay. Thanks. So I want to talk a little bit about how songs have the capacity to act as problem-solving devices. when oriented to the problems that punishment creates through social exclusion, separation, and alienation. Firstly, I know that conceptualizing songs as problem-solving devices is provocative, and as such, I want to make it clear that I'm not evoking problem-solving as automatic or inevitable. Instead, I'm thinking about problem-solving as a capacity of some of the songs, which may or may not be activated under different circumstances. I think it's important to stress that songs are first and foremost works of art and creative expression that have inherent value irrespective of their social use. Particularly because in a project like Distant Voices, which is very invested in the idea of positive social change through the arts, calling a song a problem-solving device risks instrumentalizing it. So the value of arts-based activities and interventions in carceral spaces is often framed in terms of their potential to help rehabilitate via the positive psychological or behavioral effects on prisoners. In this rehabilitative and individualizing discourse, the problem that needs to be solved is the prisoner's attitude or behavior. And music making is primarily valued as a therapeutic process, which can help an individual address their offending. In prison, participants in our project sometimes use this officially sanctioned discourse when they're interviewed at the end of the session, describing the experience as an opportunity for them to practice healthy self-expression or as evidence that their teamwork skills are improving. So whilst not wanting to deny that participation in arts-based activities can have positive effects, we've definitely seen that in our work, we aim to resist the dominant rehabilitative logic here. Instead, we consider that songwriting with people in criminal and community justice settings is a dialogic group activity and the creation of a temporary creative community rather than an individualizing therapeutic or civilizing process. Next point is songs are sociable. So in the context of our songwriting workshops, although participants collaborate principally with one of the kind of musician members of the team, most of the songs have had, they're created by way more people. So phone calls to loved ones on the first night of the session, or chats with cellmates, or, working with other members of the team who offer ideas and inspiration, all get worked into the songs, making them what they are. And there's also objects and spaces that similarly play a role in shaping the song. So including the variety of musical instruments that we happen to bring on that time, or in fact, the kind of spaces that we're able to make music in. So it could be a broom cupboard, or it could be a chapel. Even when songs are created by one person, in general, they're not created in a cultural or social isolation, but the songs are rich in intertextual references and expressive of shared social attitudes. It might not be surprising that one of the most regularly mentioned musicians who people wanted to emulate was Johnny Cash. Why is that? So once created, songs are complex things, they're changeable entities, and then they're doing kind of different things in different contexts. So they're doing a different thing, maybe when played on the radio compared to being listened to in bed by, their participant's loved one who made that song. And also in different forms. So the song is different when it's a sort of performed as a live acoustic version, or if it's a mastered track. Songs help to do things other than problem solve, including sometimes creating or exacerbating problems. They have emotional resonances that are not universal, and their effects are not always immediately apparent or anticipated. So they're kind of slippery things. In our analysis, we suggested 2 ways that songs might act as problem-solving devices, which are by no means exclusive. So firstly, songs that problem solve by affording the songwriter an opportunity to explore and rework memories, often shaping them into a narrative structure that's oriented towards a different or better future. For example, in Rewind that we heard on Monday night. Secondly, songs that problem solve by mediating relations both inside and outside of the prison, which might somehow help people to craft a smoother transition home. For example, bars and multicolored chairs that we also heard. So how the songs do this can tell us a lot about punishment and reintegration. I just want to make a few comments broadly on the songs. Yeah. Okay, so across the project, most of the songs explicitly involve an element of the participant co-writer's biography, if not a crafted autobiographical narrative with a kind of beginning, middle, and end. A majority of participants have consciously or not chosen to write with a first-person singular narrative voice and a representation of themselves as the protagonist of the song. However, when listening to the songs, it's important to remember that the song's protagonist is a persona that's co-constructed by the songwriters, rather than an accurate representation of the co-writer and their experiences. Nonetheless, we note that for many participants, the distinction between self and persona is very blurred. In these cases, having one's narrative believed by the session team and to be perceived as truthful and authentic is very important, particularly when participants feel that they've been socially forgotten, unheard, or deemed untrustworthy. Further, the dominance of first-person narratives shouldn't surprise us if we consider the role that punishment plays in encouraging people to produce a coherent narrative of oneself and one's actions. It's interesting to note that our songs with autobiographical narratives, especially of redemption, have tended to be the focus for those, for people first encountering our project. And I think that that's possibly because in reflecting on past misdemeanors and emphasizing present and future positive change, such songs fit the image of what both prisons and audiences, including those in the criminal justice system, might expect songs by prisoners to sound like. And it would be good to understand more about how these redemption songs work for people. Should we interpret these songs akin to what Shad Maruna describes as the crafting and adoption of redemption scripts as an aid to desistance? Or could we think about them as enforced narratives as described by the historian Carolyn Steedman, so crafted in order to aid successful progression through the system and sort of tailored to that need? Perhaps in keeping with the idea of a song as a multiplicity, they're doing both those things. And the second way that songs might act as problem-solving devices relates to those that act to mediate relationships between people inside and outside of the prison. And I'd like to say that these songs, I think, are performative, intended to reaffirm existing or encourage a hopeful version of relationships and homecoming into being. In terms of our research theme of coming home, songs for family tend to, not depict home as a site of ambiguity and conflict that it is for many of us, but rather employ home as a metaphor for stability, for love and happiness. In many of the songs, positive home is positioned in a binary opposition to negative prison, although there are some songs that really interestingly kind of blur the boundaries between these or capture the experience of prison becoming home. So for some prisoners, an apology might be seen as necessary for familial reintegration, and songs that act as apologies also implicitly ask family not to abandon or give up on them. Participants are generally looking to the future and coming home to the people they love rather than seeking communication with victims, should they exist. And this orientation also suggests that the people who take part in our workshops don't see them as part of a kind of formal process of progression through the system, but rather as a space liminal to the prison in which different ideas and relations can be creatively explored and enacted. Sessions where we have a mixed group of participants, i.e. prisoners and staff, often produce songs from staff which give advice, express empathy, or describe helping others, which is interesting. And I think maybe we could say that here their professional role is sort of affecting the subject matter of the songs. Such songs kind of aim to problem solve on behalf of others. Only a small number of the songs written by imprisoned participants explicitly protest against the system, Queen's Hotel being one of the most explicit and catchy, and that was also featured in the gig. A greater number of the songs include sort of fleeting references to detention, often using the metonym of cage or jangling keys to represent their negative perception of imprisonment. Prisoners are often kind of acutely aware of the ways that their song, if it's seen as a complaint, might have the potential to cause trouble for them while they're still in the system. Thus, protest songs by prisoners might try and balance their criticisms with claims that they're only joking or that it's not all bad. And again, we saw that with Queen's Hotel. Such songs problem solve by mediating relationships within the prison between staff and prisoners, but also seek a wider public outside the prison for the issues that they raise. I think I'll leave that there.
That's great. Kate, I know you've got 2 or 3 questions you were going to ask Phil, but I'm going to suggest that you just ask one now and then hold the other questions for the Q&A. And in that embarrassing bit where nobody has a question, you ask that question, ask a question then. Just what I want to do is just have a little dialogue between you two and then get to the 2 short pieces of artwork that we want to share before we invite everybody else to join us in the chat. So cool. One question, Kate.
Okie dokie. Well, the first thing I wanted to say was when, in a typical academic style, whether or not identifying songs as perhaps problem-solving devices is contentious sort of depends on how you conceptualize problems and solutions. Because in a sense, you know, a prison sentence is a problem and a song or music can provide salve to an extent to that problem. I was particularly interested in your identification even of rehabilitation as problematic. I too have quite a problem with the way it's often conceived, at least, as individualizing, pathologizing, as my past students could attest. But I was interested to ask you to reflect a bit further on whether or not you discerned a tension in that music writing process between that perceived need to sort of tell that redemptive, rehabilitative narrative and that desire to tell one's own story and make of it what you want. Jay talks about this in his article, Always Got to Be Two Mans, quite extensively. Yeah. But yeah, it just struck me. And how do you go about, if you do go about, firstly sort of identifying that, how do you go about mitigating it and holding that space against those logics of the system?
That's a great question with many parts.
Sorry.
I think, yeah, so the first thing, I'm definitely not suggesting that songs are a solution to the problem of punishment. I think when I was kind of first playing with this idea of songs as problem-solving devices, it was as a way of not kind of mining the songs or the song lyrics for what they can tell us about punishment, but rather thinking about, well, hang on, what are they, let's look at the agency of the songs themselves. Let's look at the agency of the people that are coming to these songwriting workshops. You know, what are they using our project to say or to kind of do for the people that they care to communicate with? And also just like interested in the way that songs have the power to move and travel in ways that people who are in prison don't. Yeah, so that's where I was kind of coming from there. In terms of like, yeah, rehabilitation and the kind of tensions in the kind of narrative and internal processes of you know, healing and getting something from it. I think absolutely there's a tension there. I think in terms of the way that people use narratives, I think they use them in really complex ways. So if I can use an example from my own life briefly, not saying that this is the same as having to make an account of oneself to progress through the criminal justice system, but having recently become a parent, health visitors are now a regular part of my life, coming in to talk to me and look at me and see how I'm looking after my baby. And talking to other new parents, it's very clear that we all lie to these health visitors. We all tell them, we know what they want to hear. There are certain things that we just don't talk about because we want to avoid censure or, you know, further involvement. And I think, but, you know, in saying that, I still derive enormous benefits from those encounters. I still find out what I need to know, if that makes sense. And I still kind of, it's sort of like it's a finessed account, but at the same time it's a truthful account, because I'm still coming away from that feeling reassured that I'm doing the right thing and that that I'm getting the information I need. And I think that people, yeah, work with narratives in these kind of complex ways. They kind of hold the two together, and this is something that we can all do. But I also think in terms of like, for us as researchers, what we should do in terms of thinking about the kinds of narrative accounts that people make in these redemption narratives is that we need to always think about them within the context of the system and within the context of the kind of way that we have to practice giving these accounts of ourselves in order to get certain, you know, in order to progress. Yeah, does that make sense? Fergus,
it does. No, I'm not going to add, because I think this question, the thorny question of what rehabilitation is, what it means, whether it's enforced or chosen, who's in charge of it, is going to be picked up in a short film that we're about to share, made by a member of our community, Martin, who has created a beautiful piece of art which speaks from direct experience of the system. But before we get there, and this is a beautiful illustration of how in this project nobody is just one thing or has just one role. So I'm the sound engineer on the film which is about to share Martin's brilliant art. Phil is the key researcher on the project, the research associate who did a great deal of the research work, but she's also a poet and has written beautiful work which is drawn from and responds to or engages with her fieldwork diaries, the notes that she kept for herself as she was conducting the research. So Phil's going to share a poem, I think right now, and then we're going to play a film which shares Martin's piece of art. And after that, we're going to open the floor for everybody else to take part in the conversation. So you can start to put questions in the chat as soon as you like, or you can start thinking about what you might want to ask us as soon as Phil starts reading, and then as soon as we watch the film. So go for it, Phil.
Cool. So this is a poem about hospitality and also about shopping for food for a workshop in a prison very early in the morning and not maybe paying too much attention for what I was doing. Okay. He used the thought to grab a rock and smash a window just to get sent back in. I put the bag down on the table, crossed onions with rhyming dictionaries, bunions, minions. Thankfully, no one ate my error. The next day, he brought us apples, like bloody pointed teeth. He said that they hurt his, disguised a gift as a warning. Cigarette in his left bow fingers, the pear on his right pulsed the button in his throat as he names each bird nesting under the lid of the hall. He goes on, sees gulls out loud, as if I had never mind. I let him teach because. Words fleshed out by a machine, his fix visible, a cyborg no older than my dad, because my dad, takes my hand and presses into it a bit of gravel, rasps, this stone is special because no one even noticed it. We write a song about his television, sound furnishes the nest. Head cocked, ecstatic, he weathers floods and famine, gleaning things to care for from the thatch of a world that has nowhere else to put him.
Where can we get copies of Stir? This is the collection, Phil's collection of poems.
You can download them for free online on, I think, on the Distant Voices website and online.
Yeah, which we've already got in the chat. So now I'm going to ask Heather, who's working away in the background to help us host this, to share her screen and play the film which shares Martin's art.
In this assembly of bison, gorilla and mirrors in the form of a circus big top, I hope to show a relationship of ideas. Both bison and gorilla are made from paper mache, and the big top is mirrors mounted on a metal frame and other materials. The papers that I shredded to make both bison and gorilla included court and parole papers, psychological assessments and worksheets from my offending behaviour course, as well as songs, artwork and other writings of my own from my time in prison. My idea in this piece was to transform one thing into another. The process of transformation is an extremely difficult one to go through. The difficulty is more psychological than physical. There needs to be a stirring of the soul. For me, that entailed an acceptance of a problem and moving into recovery. I literally needed to look myself in the mirror and get brutally honest with myself. To see myself as I was, I needed to change. The bison and gorilla represent two opposing sides of me. The unstoppable force meets the immovable object. My will to change opposed to my will not to change. I am both the immovable object and also the unstoppable force within my own mind. The mirrored big top is a representation of the criminal justice system and how offenders are seen as being broken by the system, by the press and in wider society. In days gone by, prisoners were put in stocks for their humiliation and for the entertainment of others. Has anything changed today? Society still humiliates prisoners and uses prisons for entertainment. People like to look from a safe distance, behind the bars. The broken mirrors also represent the psychological battle over how I see myself. I have to struggle against how I have been taught to see myself by the system as broken. The system's brutalisation needn't always be physical. To survive it, I need to find a new way of seeing myself. I need to unlearn and relearn who I really am and what I really am. To transform my thinking, I cannot allow any system to pose its view on me. No prison sentence, course or programme can ever bring about rehabilitation. The system cannot rehabilitate. You can't change someone by force. But at the same time, the role of positive external influences and opportunities such as family support and friendships need to be acknowledged. The reaction of other people around you makes a big difference, for better or worse. In the big top, there is an unbroken mirror. It invites you, the viewers, to take a look at yourselves. If you look honestly in the mirror, what do you see? I believe the world is a broken and beautiful place. Non sum qualis eram. I am not what I once was. What about you?
Thanks for sharing that. Thank you to Martin and also to Aileen Monroe for filming it. So now's the time when you can unmute your microphones and ask questions, and you can do it either just by speaking or by raising your hand. I'm going to switch my view so that I can see all your boxes at once. I think we've already got a question or two in the chat. I'm just trying to scroll back. So this question from Les back, who I should mention is one of the members of our advisory group, which has helped to steer the project over the last few years as well. He asks, is it that the problems that the songs can solve are left open by thinking about them in this way? Les, do you want to unmute and just say what's behind your question as well?
Yeah, thanks for that, Fergus. Yeah, firstly, can I just say what an amazing achievement to pull this off. It's fantastic to be here and just to hear about the project and the events and stuff. Yeah, I just thought that was one of the things that struck me when Phil was talking, that in a way the problems that rehabilitation promises to solve always seem to be cruel, as Martin points out in that beautiful piece. But I thought what was interesting about how you're approaching the work that songs can do is that the problem isn't fixed. The problem seems to be left open, and the song moves through us in an open way. That's what struck me just as I was listening.
Thanks, Les. Do you want to respond, Phil?
I don't know. Yeah, I think that's a great, very perceptive comment, and yeah, I would agree with you.
We've often said, one of the things that certainly I've moved from conventional research methods, interviews mainly, to creative methods, and one of the things that I've learned in the process is that these methods have an open texture, so they don't close the question by providing an answer. You don't gather the data, crunch it through some kind of thematic analysis, and then say, here's the answer to my research question, here's the truth, even worse, were we to claim that. Instead, there are lots of suggestive ideas, provocations, interruptions to the way that we routinely think in songs, and the interpretation of them is not closed or fixed or definite. And so I think you're right, Les. I think the problem can live in the song unresolved, and there's something important about that, and it can mean different things for different people as well. So I'll shut up and we can get to the next question. So MR has asked, oops, so many questions coming in, I can't keep up. How can we enable rehabilitation when change is focused on programs and not interventions or approaches that are based on people and their issues. Maybe I should have a go at that one, since that's kind of been part of what my work's been about for the last couple of decades. I mean, I think this is a problem, that programs and courses, offending behaviour programs as they're described in the criminal justice system, are based on aggregating lots of information to try to arrive at a generalization about the set of problems that exists and that needs to be tackled. And there's a kind of generalized understanding of the problems, and then there's a generalized prescription about how they can be fixed. And obviously, whenever a complex individual, and we're all complex individuals, meets those courses, there's something fundamentally brutalizing about that. It basically says, take your complex and difficult and multifaceted life and process it through this small box that we've designed, which we think you'll come out of the other side of somehow better. And a lot of the work that I've been involved with as a criminologist, exploring and understanding people's processes of change, personal change, but also movement through criminal justice, has been about insisting that's the wrong way around, and that it's not about designing a better box. It's about understanding people's lives and experiences and then trying to find ways to support the sorts of development that they want. And this whole project has been about that, not in the sense of, as Phil said herself, using creative processes to transform individuals or to allow them to transform themselves, but rather to try to change the social contexts within which people move, and through which they're trying to move towards lives which they consider to be better for them and for others. So that's a long answer to a difficult question. Stephen Collett, your hand is up, so fire away.
Hi, Fergus.
Hi, Steve.
Thank your very eloquent disposition on rehabilitation just made me think about, is the fundamental question about projects like Distant Voices and lots of other kind of art-based projects, isn't the end in itself simply that opportunities are given to people to express themselves lyrically, musically, through poetry, through paintings or whatever, and that in a sense is an end in itself, and what people make of that in their own lives is up to them. And the reason why I asked that, I don't know whether you've come across a book by a guy called Malik Al-Nasir, and there's a Glasgow connection here because Malik Al-Nasir is a young, or was a young Scouser, homeless, been in prison, who went to a poetry recital by Gil Scott-Heron. And as you will know, his dad was the first black footballer who played for Celtic. And as a young care leaver, and Gil started corresponding with him. And this was about 30 years ago. And this guy now, Malik Al-Nasir, is just signed up to do a PhD in history at Cambridge University, having published this book. So just from a chance meeting and Gil Scott-Heron showing interest in this young homeless kid, he has developed into a pretty phenomenal author, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think that you're right, that part of the point of having or of creating opportunities like this project has created is to give people the right to participate and then to determine the direction, the form of their participation and the impact of their participation for themselves, rather than kind of reproducing the logic of the system, which is to say, we demand a certain impact of activities on you in order to allow something to happen. But I'm going to let Phil in. I can tell you want in.
I was like, Yeah, no, absolutely. I think just to add to that, I think another thing that arts-based methods can really do is help complexify or illuminate sort of murkier little intricate parts of really complex social problems like justice and punishment. So I think that's also a really important value of projects like this. And also there's just something about the way that a song encapsulates ideas that, you know, an academic paper perhaps doesn't, or does differently, that I think is also really valuable. So just shout out for arts-based methods there.
There's a brilliant comment in the chat, which I can't find the original comment, but somebody has discussed what William said, something about dissolving the questioner. Can somebody explain to me or take me back to the comment that William made? Because that sounds fascinating and important. So somebody, Lucy, help me out. Or William, help me out if you'd like to.
Yeah, William commented, perhaps the question is not meant to be answered, rather to dissolve the questioner. That just really, I found that a really resonant comment. I don't know, William, if you want to come in and reflect a bit more on that, or if anybody else wants to come in on that.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's crucial that happens, you know, the questioner. It's not about the answer, really. It's about the questioner seeing themselves, asking the question, and that kind of solves the problem in a way. Yeah, it's difficult to explain, really, but I know what I'm talking about, but I can't put any words.
I think I'm following. Let me see if I get this right. So, well, actually, there's also the question of who decides what the question is, right? And part of the discourse of rehabilitation in the criminal justice system is that the system sets the question as being something like, how are you going to change yourself, or how are you going to be changed so that we will take you back, i.e. into society, and kind of assumes that that is the right question, and then demands an answer of the person who's been deemed or defined through criminalization to be the offender, and I use the term in inverted commas, and maybe having part of what creative processes do is allow you to well, in our methodology, Joe, who's on the call, I think Joe Collins and Scott got us thinking early on about replacing questions with clues, CLEWS, which, if I remember correctly, and Joe will hopefully be here to pick me up on this, means kind of finding a line of flight or a line of inquiry through something of interest, and then pursuing that line with as much kind of creativity and ingenuity as we can muster, and seeing where it takes us, and what we learn in the process about ourselves, about the issue in question. And I think I've found that myself as a researcher liberating. Like, the question can be terribly oppressive when you feel that it's your duty and your compulsion to answer it. And I'll give you a good example from the project overall. The core research questions for Distant Voices started out as being concerned with reintegration after punishment. And the more that the project's gone on, the less happy I've been with the concept of reintegration at all, because even the word implies to me the insertion of the individual back into some machine. I don't know, something about the word integrate, which almost sounds robotic or systemic or mechanical to me. So as the project's progressed, I've become much more interested in the theme of solidarity. How do people find solidarity and build community with one another? And what role do creative processes play? Those turn out to be better questions than what enables a person to be reintegrated. That question itself had the problem written into it, I think. I'm talking too much, so I'm going to shut up. Kate, I would like to draw you back in, because I don't know if you just want to kind of flow with the conversation as it's evolved, or whether you want to go back to some of the questions that you had originally thought of in relation to Phil's input. But
I'm fine with flowing.
Flowing
Flowing is all very good with me. I think one of the things I was most struck by, so in a sense, I am both flowing and coming back to the question, just to make it more complicated, is the way in which listening to, sharing these creative outputs and foregrounding people's stories holds the capacity to fight back against those rehabilitative ideas of having been bad and needing to make amends and all of those kind of things, and how people, I mean, when I wrote about music and the pertinence it can have to people inside, it wasn't strictly about songwriting, but listening to music and the way people harness the music for their own purposes and their own stories. And there's a freedom and an agency in that, which is incredibly important when you have so little means to fashion it. So I guess that's more of a statement than it is a question.
That's cool.
But I think it kind of it speaks, because I'm sort of talking to William in the chat there. And I sort of, what I meant by there's a power in saying I don't know, is that when you are at the sharp end of the criminal justice system, it is very difficult to answer in a neutral, non-committal way that doesn't come heaped with judgments upon you about being evasive or difficult or failing to comply. And failure to comply, of course, is a massive thing in prison. Whereas opening up those kind of stories for, you know, the uncertainty, the necessary uncertainty. Jesus, no one else knows what they're going to be doing in 5 years. I certainly don't. You know, I have no idea. I mean, I'm currently at Hogwarts. It'd be lovely to stay, but sooner or later they're probably going to want rid of me. You know, and there's therefore, it's not just about extending agency, in the sense of, you know, my story, my way, but also about recalibrating those sort of power relationships in the broader sense.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. Great. We're almost out of time, and I've got a few kind of things I need to say in closing. I feel as if we could keep talking for hours and hours, but we said the event would be an hour, so we better honour that. So let me just say to everybody, thanks for joining us, and thanks for contributing to the dialogue. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have, and we have, I'm sure. The next conversation is on Friday at the same time at noon, and in that conversation, Alison Urie, who's the director of Vox Liminis, and Oliver Escobar, who's another one of the research team, are going to discuss the foundations for building bridges. So the first two events in the festival have been about the void, if you like. They've been about the problems, and now we want the rest of the festival to be about ways forward. I'm not going to say solutions because that sounds too closed, but about ways that we can move forward and think about doing things differently. So we start that process on Friday with the conversation that Oliver and Alison are going to lead. The next event after that is Monday night, when we have the world premiere of A Giant on the Bridge, which is an amazing film, a film of a performance that combines stories and songs. And we released a trailer for the film, which is on YouTube now, and we can put links in the chat just now for both the sign up for Friday's conversation and the trailer for Giant. Once you've seen the trailer, you're going to want to sign up and come on Monday night, and I really encourage you to do that. Please keep an eye on the website, distantvoices.org.uk, over the next few weeks. The podcast series, which we mentioned in the first event, The Art of Bridging, which has been led by Lucy Cathcart-Froden, launches on Saturday morning, I think about 10 o'clock. And then the remaining episodes will follow at a fortnightly interval over the next 12 weeks, 10 to 12 weeks. So keep an eye out for that. And of course, once the festival and the podcast series is finished, then the films of the gigs and of Giant, the show on Monday night, are going to be freely available on YouTube next year at some point. And we'll also publish a set of learning resources, which we would love you all to use, whether that's in schools, colleges, universities, communities, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. If you can use those resources, we really want you to do that. So keep an eye on the website for all of that. Lastly, we have an inevitable online survey that we would very much like you to complete. It's short. It just takes a couple of minutes. There's a link coming up in the chat, and we'd love you to click on that and just give us a tiny bit of feedback, because we want to learn from the process, and keep on thinking about how we move forward. So I think that's all we've got time for. Thank you very much for coming. Thanks to Phil for joining me here, for Kate from joining me from Cambridge, and all of you for signing in. And I hope to see you again on Friday. So thank you very much. Bye.
Empty calendar.